I'm going to talk about intergenerational care. Everything we've been talking about is about relationships and communities and interdependence, and above all, it's all about people. And I'm going to be talking about people of all ages now, and the relationships between people of all ages, but particularly focused around kind of different types of care settings in particular. When Jenny first asked me to speak, I was director and co-founder of United for All Ages, which is a national social enterprise working to promote intergenerational action. And my current role was just not even really a twinkle in my eye, but I'm now chief executive of two charitable foundations which are linked to Hallmark care homes. You're getting a sneak preview here of the Hallmark Foundation logo, which is going to be unveiled in a few weeks' time, along with a website telling people much more about what we do and particularly about grants that we make. And there may be people here who might be interested in applying for a grant, but don't feel obliged. But anyway. The other thing I am is, amongst other things, is chair of something called the Together Project, which is actually putting a lot of what I'm going to talk about into action. It brings together parent and toddler groups that go and visit care homes on a weekly or regular basis. And a lot of the photos I've included in this presentation come from the Together Project. It's a fantastic project. And the beauty of it is obviously there are toddlers and there are older people in care homes, but it also brings in the parents, and particularly the mothers, many of whom may be isolated during maternity and during the first couple of years of a child's life. So actually there's a win-win-win there in terms of three generations benefiting from this work together. I'm going to be talking a bit about United for All Ages. I want to particularly talk about the growth in intergenerational activities over the last 5-6 years or so, and the benefits of that, why bringing people together, what are the benefits for older people, for young people, and people of all ages, and the different types of projects that exist out there. I can't do this without mentioning COVID, unfortunately. COVID has been a bit of a disaster, to be honest, for intergenerational work. It has stopped a lot of mixing, but it's also challenged people to try and do things in different ways. So I'll talk about some of that, and then I'll talk about some of our vision and ambition for the future. Right, so the first photograph. This is just to demonstrate the joy and the magic of intergenerational interaction. This is from the Together Project. An older resident, Pauline, from a care home in East London with a toddler visiting, and you can just see, you can try and pose these photographs. These things aren't posed at all. This is real natural joy and magic between these two. And the joy is a word that the Together Project use constantly throughout their work. The joy that comes from this kind of interaction. This one is some older children. They're primary school children, and with a resident of a sheltered housing scheme in Hackney. And they're learning about local history. So it's an opportunity for the older person to tell some of the youngsters about their local community, some of the history, and for them to share some of what's going on at the moment. Again, intense interaction there. Now, does anyone know where this is? Some of you might have seen this photograph. I've published it a few times, but it's a wonderful, bright, vibrant children's playground, as you can see. That's pretty obvious. But it's actually in the middle of a care home site in Clapham in southwest London. It's hard to believe. There are not many care homes with that kind of scale of a playground and brightness. And it's on the site of Apples and Honey Nightingale, which is written about by Jenny in her book. And it is a fantastic example of a care home and a nursery being co-located. And I'll say a bit more about that later, but it just, it transforms the site, having that in the middle of it. Obviously, there are normally lots of people around there as well, but the other photo from Apples and Honey Nightingale is this one. Most people tend to focus, when they talk about intergenerational work, they focus on what's going on within the hoop. So they focus on the older people and the younger children. If you look outside the hoop, you'll see people of all ages who are also benefiting from the interaction. And in this case, as I said, it's where you have a nursery co-located with a care home. So you have parents of the children, you have sons and daughters and relatives of some of the older people living in the care home, and you have some of the staff as well, and people from the local community. So what I always say to people, this is not simply about older and younger, or the oldest and the youngest generation. This is about people of all ages, and I think it's really important that we remember that if we're talking about transforming our communities. So, as I said, we're a social enterprise. We've been around for almost 11 years now, and we promote interaction between people of different ages. We try and influence policy at a national level. We try and share good practice, and then we support organisations to put it into action. So we're on a consultancy basis. We were set up by my wife and myself. Denise and I set up United for All Ages, and her background's very much in childcare and early years education. My background's more in terms of working with older people, but I've also run a national childcare charity and had experience of working in public and voluntary sectors. The most amazing thing for me has been how we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years the growth in intergenerational interaction in the UK. Now, I'm going to have to preface that by saying, where were we pre-COVID? Because this is unfortunately, March 2020. In lots of ways, is kind of like life before COVID and life after COVID. But there was a huge growth in the number of intergenerational projects taking place around the UK. And ironically, in March 2020, it was going to be the first national intergenerational week at the end of March. But that basically didn't happen because lockdown had already started. But people will have seen some of the media coverage around this, and obviously the Channel 4 programme, Old People's Home for 4-year-olds, programmes like that, have actually brought it to life. People have been able to see it in reality themselves, as well as actually lots of projects going on the ground. Lots of interest in the media, lots of interest in social media. But none of this has been led by government or even local government, really. It's all come from the grassroots. It's about people doing things because they think it's the right thing to do and really feel passionate about it. And so a lot of the projects, including the Apples and Honey Nightingale, are really led by charismatic, influential people who have changed the way their local community is working. Having said that COVID is a disaster, there have been elements and things that have come out of COVID which have helped promote intergenerational work, one of which is the growth of mutual aid. So, to some extent, in quite a lot of communities, we have seen people in different generations coming together to help each other. And that's obviously has been a great thing. And I think a lot of that will continue going forward as well, in different ways. It may not be about delivering shopping and collecting prescriptions and things like that, but it might be different types of mutual support. But mixing generally has obviously been hugely affected by COVID, particularly work going on in care homes and work going on in schools and nurseries and so on. But we sense a huge appetite to get this moving again. People are desperate to get out there and desperate to mix much more than they've been able to over the last 18 months. I'm going to talk a lot about care homes in particular today, but this goes way beyond care homes, it goes way beyond nurseries and schools. We're doing a lot of work now about developing intergenerational housing and intergenerational communities on a much broader scale. So there's one particular big opportunity in every community is about the future of our high streets. High streets, obviously, they were emptying out before COVID, but they're a lot emptier now as offices have emptied, large retailers have moved out and so on, which is leaving a lot of space which can be turned into shared space which people of different generations can use. Maybe for housing, but it could be for all sorts of other community activities as well. So I think that really for us is one of the big opportunities going forward. The other great thing about the growth of intergenerational activity, when we first started, I was always talking about projects in the USA, in Singapore, in Japan, elsewhere in Europe, and so on, as examples of intergenerational work. Really good examples. Now we've got lots of examples in the UK that we can point to. And that's, I think, just a real testament as to how far things have moved forward. Another photograph. This one was pre-COVID. This is back in about January 2020. So Sky TV filming a Together project group in a care home. And just the idea of all of that, and you can just see what a mess, and no, it's not a mindful mess, but what a mess of people and activity and interaction going on. It's almost impossible to imagine that happening today, or even over the last 18 months. But this next one, this photo was taken a couple of weeks ago, and this is in a Guinness Care scheme, again with a Together project group of parent and toddler visiting with the older people who are resident there. And things are beginning to come back, which is fantastic. You know, people are welcoming the opportunity to interact, but putting in place necessary safeguards and so on. And more activities are also taking place outside, and that's great during the summer and hopefully during a late summer and autumn. But how long can that continue as the weather deteriorates? Who knows? But I mean, doing things outside has been a major bonus over the last few months. So why is all of this important? Well, I mean, the starting point for a lot of our work is the fact that Britain is one of the most age-segregated countries in the world, and that basically means that older people, and the oldest in particular, and young people, the youngest in particular, have very little contact with other generations apart from within their own family. And so there are a number of consequences of that. Lack of mixing, lack of connection can lead to all sorts of things. We have it embedded in terms of the way a lot of our services are organised in local communities and through local authorities. You have the Children's Services Department on the one hand, and you have services for older people on the other side of it. But families are also increasingly fragmented. But the lack of connection can lead to all sorts of other social ills. So it can lead to a breakdown in trust. It can lead to division in our communities around intergenerational fairness issues, for example, but also voting patterns, for example, are very much, both in terms of the Brexit referendum and recent elections, you've seen very different voting patterns between young people and older people. And it can lead to the rise of ageism, and ageism works both ways, not just towards older people, but obviously the other way as well. So those are some of the issues we're trying to tackle. By bringing people together, you can address some of those issues. You can get people sharing together, then enables them to understand each other better and to raise awareness and to tackle and reduce ageism. But also, children and older people and young people face some quite similar issues. If you actually start digging under the surface, there are some big issues there. Some of them are around loneliness. Loneliness is a massive issue, not just for older people. I think it's probably even a bigger issue for a lot of younger people at the moment in our society, particularly around lockdown. And a lot of the services that older people and children and young people rely on are in crisis at the moment. But some of this approach can actually help improve care, it can improve housing, it can certainly improve the health of people, and it can bring communities back together again. There are some other bigger issues as well. So I mentioned intergenerational fairness. The climate crisis is obviously one that affects all of us, what kind of world are we going to leave behind for the next generation, the generation after? Massive question for all of us. I'm not going to talk about the funding of social care, except to say one thing, that any solution needs to be intergenerationally fair, I believe. And therefore, a 1% increase or 2% increase in national insurance isn't really going to cut it in terms of intergenerational fairness. And it would be a shame if we're going to try and make progress if it's done on a divisive basis. So it's important. This approach is important because it brings joy, it raises awareness, it tackles fairness, and it builds stronger communities. Then the other key bit about this is it's all about mutuality as well. It's got to bring benefits for older people and benefits for younger people. Those benefits may be different. It is about every generation benefiting from the activities. For older people, there's quite a lot of evidence now about improvements in individuals' health, both physical and mental health, about improvements in the quality of their care, where you have intergenerational care projects. Obviously, we talk about loneliness and reductions in loneliness, but I think the key thing for a lot of people is about engagement and meaningful activities which provide older people in particular in care homes with something to look forward to. I mean, people constantly talk about the Monday morning when the parent and toddler group is going to come in as a key point, key moment in the week of that care home. There are huge benefits as well for children and young people, clearly in terms of learning. I think one of the key things is obviously learning from older people, but older people in particular who have time. It's the time that they have to speak with and discuss things with the children. Quite often the children may not have that kind of level of attention from either their parents, their families, or from even their school. But it's about giving children a lot more confidence, improving their communication skills, and so on. And there are an increasing number of projects, and Ofsted recognise this as well, which are all about that development of children's learning skills. It is about mutual understanding and awareness, and I think ageism is a massive issue in our society, and it's probably the one big ism which we haven't really seriously tackled, and I think this is one way to help reduce ageism. I've said already it's about more than 2 generations. It's about looking at people of all ages. In terms of care providers, I think there are a number of things which care providers can get out from this, and certainly one of the things that providers who are already undertaking intergenerational activities say that it provides a USP. Now, Anne was telling me last night about the care home that her mother is in, and one of the reasons they chose that care home was because the care home was actually engaged in intergenerational activities. So it provides the care provider with a kind of USP. So if you're a care home which is involved in intergenerational activity, at the moment, there aren't huge numbers of them. So if you're doing that, it's something else that you can tell potential residents about. We have seen that quite a lot of care homes are now getting outstanding ratings, partially because of the intergenerational activities that they are involved in. So that's been recognised by the Care Quality Commission, and similarly Ofsted have been giving nurseries involved in intergenerational activities, they've been giving them outstanding ratings as well. So it's another reason for providers to get involved. At the Apples and Honey Nightingale Nursery, the staff there, the care staff, actually have subsidised childcare at the nursery, and that was obviously a win-win and a way of helping to retain care staff as well. But the other thing is, I personally believe it really helps to make the job of being a care worker or a nursery worker a bit more interesting. It just stretches the boundaries and gets people involved in doing things that perhaps their normal day-to-day role may not involve, as well as being able to work with older people who are more meaningfully engaged, children who are more confident and communicate better, and so on. So better services, better facilities, and I do think we need to try and get the Care Quality Commission to understand not just intergenerational care, but relational care generally, and then reflect that in terms of the way providers are inspected and regulated. So there's a sliding, we call it a sliding scale of intergenerational interaction. The key thing is this is all about building relationships between people of different ages. You know, there are quite a lot of examples of where a nursery or a school goes into a care home at Christmas, for example, and sings carols. Now that is an intergenerational activity, but it tends to be once a year, and there doesn't tend to be much in the way of interaction either. It's very much a group of children on one side of the room, and a group of older people on the other side of the room, listening to the carols or whatever it is. So we need to build on those occasional visits and really get people visiting or taking part in activities on a much more regular basis, whether it's weekly or fortnightly. Obviously, moving towards models which are either co-located, but that may not be realistic. You know, there aren't hundreds of care homes with lots of spare space to build a nursery, for example. But there are lots of care homes which actually are pretty close to a nursery in their local community. But the two may never have had much to do with each other. So it is about looking out to see who's working in our local community, who can we build links with, and so on. We are seeing a growth of what I call shared sites or centres for all ages. And the nursery and a care home is a centre for all ages, but there are all sorts of different models, some of them involving housing, some community facilities, and I'll show you some examples in a minute. We're encouraging local authorities to take a much more strategic approach to how their communities might become communities for people of all ages. And reflecting that in everything that the local authority does. The key point for me, you can start at the top of that scale and you can work your way down it really. So Apples and Honey Nightingale is a fantastic example now of a care home with a nursery on its site. That opened in 2017, but it didn't happen overnight. So it first started with a private nursery visiting the care home on a weekly basis about 10 or so years ago. That was successful. The care home then agreed to a parent and toddler group could be run on the care home site in one of their rooms on a weekly basis, and that went well. And then the care home identified a spare building on the site, which was then converted into a nursery. It took place over quite a long time, and it was building on people's understanding of the benefits and so on. So I think start small and grow bigger. I've mentioned a number of these examples, but actually the other thing is people are doing it for themselves. So there are many more individuals now and families who are living in multi-generational households in our country, where you have 3 or more generations of the same family living under the same roof. That's been a big trend in the USA for quite a long time, and in this country we're seeing a big growth, and I think it's been growing during COVID as well. But we've also seen a growth in schemes like home share, where you have an older person who perhaps may have a spare bedroom, 2 spare bedrooms, which they then let out at a nominal rent or no rent at all to young people in return for companionship and practical support, and obviously giving a young person somewhere to live and start their, you know, whether they're a student or their first, second job and so on. There are thousands now, literally, of links between nurseries and schools and care homes. One project which you might want to have a look at is run jointly by My Home Life, which a lot of you probably are aware of, which is an organisation that supports care homes and the quality of care homes, together with the Linking Network. And basically there are 11 big projects now being run around the country, which bring 5 to 14-year-olds together with local care homes in their area. There are also examples now of care homes where they're actually giving some of their space, a room in the care home, to childminders. And Torbay is one of the best examples of that. So the childminder spends half of their week working from the care home with children. So you have the same benefits as a nursery being based at the care home, a childminder based at the care home, and then the other half of the week they base from their normal domestic premises. And then that's something that a lot of care homes could do, because all it requires really is one room which can be used for that basis. And then looking more broadly, there are lots of sheltered housing schemes out there, lots of extra care housing schemes, which are now thinking about, partially because a lot of sheltered housing is not in such great demand now, how can you use some of those flats for younger people, and there are schemes where students, for example, live alongside older people in sheltered housing schemes, and again provide companionship and practical support. And we're also seeing extra care housing, which primarily is being developed for older people with additional needs. We're seeing a number of schemes where they're now housing adults, younger adults with additional needs alongside older people. And then some bigger types of shared sites and multi-purpose sites, which I'll talk about in a second. And as I said, what we want to do is try and get every local authority to take an all-ages approach to this. This is one for our friends from Millennium Care. Some of you might recognise this site. It's actually a site called Worthington Lake. This is a picture of great ambition and multi-million pound development here. So on the site there's a care home, there's assisted living, and there's dementia care support. There was a really ambitious plan to also add to that a nursery and a community facility. And my understanding is that those two haven't been developed. Is that right? Yeah. So, and the reason being is that they did all of this work they had the money to invest in it, they had partners to work in it, but the local planning department of the council refused to let it happen. So great ambition, but we've got a lot of hearts and minds still to win in terms of making some of this happen. Some of the reason for it, they were unhappy about one or two trees having to be cut down. And that was, I think, the primary reason behind the planning being rejected. But people are thinking about how we do these things at a much bigger scale. So yeah, I'm sure there will be similar developments elsewhere. But a different example here. This is in Wilton, outside Salisbury in Wiltshire, which is quite for those of you who know that part of the world, it's quite a big army area. So this is they provide housing here for army veterans, particularly people who have been disabled in various campaigns, and so there's housing for army veterans. There's a community cafe here, but there's also training facilities for people looking to get into work, and there's what they call an enterprise hub, where people setting up new businesses and so on can actually get support and help and so on. So it's very much part of the local community, again for people of all ages. The cafe, I think, is a central feature of most of these kind of centres for all ages, really. The place where everyone can mix and share. And then this is a new site in central London, in Bermondsey, in Southwark. This is the architect's impression, but it's actually on site at the moment. It should look pretty much like this. 59 quality flats for older people on low incomes in central London. Absolutely amazing accommodation. People right in the heart of the city of London, where normally it costs a lot of money to live. So that's being developed by an arms house called United St Saviour's. So fantastic development. But you see the large glass area at the front. All of that is community space, encouraging people from the local community, young people, and people of all ages to come in and share activities with the people who actually live in the arms house. It's going to be an amazing development, and I'm sure when it's finished and open, I'm sure it will get a lot of interest. So, I've talked about some of the things that are happening. They're also, I'm going to talk about some of the things that could happen and will happen, and were going to happen, but COVID kind of got in the way. So the first one is about opening school classrooms in care homes, which has been happening on the Isle of Wight, was happening up until March 2020. It's been put on hold, but hopefully we'll get going again. It's literally where a class from a school will decamp for a morning or a day of the week and actually do their lessons in the care home, but also share activities with the residents of the care home, share meals and so on. The second one, and I'll show a picture of this in a second, is in a school, primary school in Redbridge in northeast London, where older people with dementia and depression and other mental health issues go into the school probably 2-3 times a week, sitting in on lessons, almost like teaching assistants, sharing lessons and activities with primary school children, but also then sharing meals at lunchtime with the children as well. The third one is about football foundations. So every professional football club, I think, now has a charitable foundation as part of the way they relate to the local community. I've got 3 clubs up there, one of which I support, but Liverpool Football Club has been developing intergenerational cafes around the whole of the city. So 17 intergenerational cafes around Liverpool, working with the local university and a social enterprise, where places where people of different ages can mix, but not only mix, but sharing repair activities. So making good things that perhaps people might have in previous times thrown away. Cardiff Football Club have events where they bring together older people with dementia who are supporters of Cardiff, together with school children who are also fans of Cardiff. And then Brentford, which happens to be my team, has a very good community foundation, but they've been linking students, young people, with older people in sheltered housing, and where those older people sharing lessons about and learning about cooking in particular, as well as a way of breaking down loneliness. There are an increasing number of colleges now as well, where you've got students who are studying childcare and students who are studying adult care and healthcare, who are getting together on projects together. So they're actually learning about intergenerational activities before they actually enter the workplace. So they're primed now to actually help run those activities when they do start working. And then students generally are a huge resource for a lot of this, whether they're student hubs, community volunteering, linkage type programs. There's a lot going on in universities. Obviously, again, that's been put on hold a bit. Quite a few local authorities now are looking at appointing intergenerational coordinators. A lot of what I've been talking about, I focused on England, but there's masses going on in Scotland. There's an organisation called Generations working together in Scotland who are doing a huge amount with the Scottish Parliament and other local authorities. And in Wales there is also a huge amount. The Welsh Parliament has been fantastic in terms of taking this work forward. In Wales they've got a commissioner for older people, a commissioner for younger people and children, and a commissioner for future generations, which is the really pioneering bit, is that how we ensure that policy and so on takes into account not just current generations but future generations. But a lot of local authorities now, and Gwynedd and York are 2 examples where they've actually appointed an officer as an intergenerational coordinator who's responsible for trying to bring that together across their local authority. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the huge opportunity coming up with the emptying of high streets. And I'd say watch this space. I mentioned about older people going to primary school. This is just a still taken, I'm not going to show the film, but it's a still taken from a BBC news item where older people are arriving at the primary school. So, COVID has meant, for a lot of people, mixing has just become impossible. Social distancing has just stopped so much, really. Things are beginning to happen again, but obviously a lot of activity has gone online using Zoom and other platforms, people doing videos, quizzes, you name it, sharing artwork and so on, tele-befriending. A lot of resources now online about different ways to do that. And again, people using paper-based activities as well, so sharing letters with residents of care homes, artwork, and so on. And then the big opportunity, I think, with a lot of care homes is that many care homes have really good outdoor space, and it's about how we make the most of that in good weather. But this is still a major challenge going forward. I know a lot, unfortunately, there are still care homes around that aren't allowing relatives to visit, let alone these kind of activities. So we've still got a long way to go in terms of rebuilding confidence and trust to enable intergenerational work to take place. But it will happen. I'm confident of that, because we'll get through this. Our longer term vision is that, having gone through the last year and a half, actually the 2020s become a decade of reconnection. And there are a lot of organisations now working with that kind of goal in mind. Our ambition is that wherever you live in the country, every child, every young person, every adult, every older person has the opportunity to engage in intergenerational activities wherever they live. We're hoping that by 2030 there'll be 1,000 centres for all ages, one in every community, in the way that we've had until the current government started closing, but we had a children's centre in every community. That we want to see centres for all ages in every community. Key to making this happen, we need much better evaluation. We've got to really demonstrate the impact that this has on older people, young people, but also our society, our care providers. Does it really improve the quality of care, and so on? So we need much more evidence about that. And we need government at all levels, whether it's local government or central government, to really adopt a strategic approach to this. At the moment, central government is so unjoined up in relation to all of this. We're dealing with Department of Health and Social Care, Department for Education, Department of Work and Pension, and so on, all of whom kind of not really working together on it. And we need more people championing it. We need more people championing relational care, but we need more people championing intergenerational care as well. And my message to you is, I think we should all think big about this. Every care home should become a model of relational care, and every care home should become a place where intergenerational activity, intergenerational care is part of the everyday and the norm, the way we all live in community. So, that's the new future, but that was a photo before COVID. We'll get back to that, sharing cake and everything else. This is an architect's vision of what an intergenerational housing scheme might look like. And just imagine it. I know the architect who did this, but it might seem a bit of a pipe dream, but it's actually not that far from a pipe dream. It's an amazing number of people who are using scooters now to get around their local communities. And if you want to find out more, United for All Ages has obviously got a website, or email me, or look us up on Twitter.